The pristine marble floors of Meridian Global Bank gleamed under the morning sunlight as Rachel Torres approached the entrance. At 36, dressed in comfortable black yoga pants and a simple cotton blouse, she carried herself with quiet confidence despite her casual appearance. Her husband, Alexander Torres, walked beside her, his tailored charcoal suit and subtle diamond cufflinks marking him as someone of significant means. At 44, he had built Torres Innovations into one of the country's leading technology companies, though he carried his success with understated dignity. "Are you sure you want to handle this alone?" Alexander asked, checking his watch. "Absolutely," Rachel smiled, squeezing his hand. "I've always managed the foundation's affairs independently. That was our agreement." Their relationship had always been based on mutual respect. Despite access to immense wealth, Rachel chose to live simply, pouring her energy into her education foundation that provided technological resources to underprivileged schools. "I'll take that call from Tokyo in the lobby while you get started," Alexander said. "It shouldn't take long." They entered the bank together, drawing contrasting reactions. Several employees straightened at the sight of Alexander's bespoke suit, while Rachel's casual attire earned barely concealed looks of confusion. Today's visit was unusual because the foundation typically operated through electronic transfers, but their newest initiative required establishing a separate account with documentation that needed in-person handling. As Rachel approached the customer service area, Alexander stepped aside to take his international call, his voice fading as he discussed product development with his team in Asia. The morning light caught Rachel's simple wedding band as she reached the desk of Melissa Evans, the bank's customer service manager. Melissa's perfectly styled auburn hair and crisp navy dress projected an image of polished professionalism, though the tightness around her eyes hinted at underlying tension. Neither woman realized that this routine transaction was about to become an unforgettable lesson in judgment and consequences. Melissa Evans was having a particularly difficult morning. The promotion she'd spent years positioning herself for had just gone to someone from another branch. Her carefully applied makeup concealed the redness around her eyes, but nothing could hide the brittleness in her smile when she spotted Rachel approaching in yoga pants and a casual blouse. Melissa immediately categorized her as someone who had wandered into the wrong place. Meridian Global wasn't just any bank. It was where New York's elite conducted their financial affairs. "Good morning," Rachel said pleasantly. "I'd like to make a deposit and open a new account, please." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And do you currently have an account with us?" Her tone carried subtle doubt. "No, this would be a new relationship," Rachel explained, placing a large check in a folder on the desk. "It's for the Torres Education Initiative. We're establishing a new program that requires a separate account." Melissa glanced at the check, her eyebrows rising slightly at the seven-figure amount. Her expression shifted from dismissive to suspicious. "That's a substantial deposit," she said, making no move to take the check. "May I ask where these funds originated?" "The foundation raised these funds through our annual benefit," Rachel explained. "All the documentation is here, including our 501(c)(3) certification." A few customers at nearby desks began to notice the exchange. Melissa's voice had that carrying quality that drew attention. "I'm sorry, but we don't typically establish accounts of this magnitude without proper verification," Melissa said, louder now. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding about our institution's requirements." Rachel maintained her composure, though her cheeks flushed slightly. The foundation's CFO called ahead to confirm the process. "We were told all the necessary documentation is included here." Melissa's smile tightened. "Ms. Torres, was it?" "Rachel Torres. Ms. Torres, Meridian Global serves a particular clientele. Our high-net-worth customers expect a certain environment." Melissa gestured vaguely at Rachel's attire. "I'm not convinced this is the right banking relationship for someone of your profile." The words hung in the air like a slap. Several nearby customers stopped their transactions to watch. A young bank associate looked uncomfortably between them, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. "Is there a problem with the documentation?" Rachel asked, her voice quieter but steady. Melissa's gaze became more pointed. "Let's be direct. This check is for $2,500,000. People who handle legitimate transactions of that size generally don't show up looking like they've just come from the gym. It raises questions. Rachel's eyes widened. The Torres Education Initiative is completely legitimate. We've been operating for 4 years and have helped over 75 schools across 5 states. Melissa leaned forward, her voice dropping to a stage whisper, still perfectly audible to those nearby. Perhaps you should try a different institution, one more accustomed to dealing with your type of clientele. I'd hate for us to need to escalate this situation. The threat was thinly veiled. Several customers were now openly watching, some with disapproval, others with the morbid curiosity of witnessing someone else's humiliation. Are you refusing to accept this deposit? Rachel asked, struggling to maintain her composure. Melissa's finger came up, pointing directly at Rachel in a gesture of dismissal. I'm suggesting that you take your business elsewhere before I need to call security. We take potential financial irregularities very seriously at Meridian Global. The accusation hung in the air. Rachel stood frozen, the color draining from her face as she became acutely aware of the spectators to her humiliation. Across the lobby, Alexander Torres ended his call and turned, his expression changing instantly as he registered the scene unfolding. Alexander Torres ended his call abruptly, his attention captured by the unmistakable tension across the lobby. Even from a distance, he could see Rachel's rigid posture and the flush spreading across her face. The auburn-haired bank manager was leaning forward aggressively, her finger pointed directly at his wife in a gesture of unmistakable dismissal. For a moment, Alexander observed the scene with a calculated patience that had made him legendary in business circles. His eyes narrowed as he registered the public humiliation being inflicted on Rachel, the woman who had spent years pouring her heart into helping underprivileged children access technology, who deliberately chose to live simply despite having access to unimaginable wealth. He crossed the marble floor with measured steps, his presence causing subtle ripples of recognition. A security guard straightened his posture. A bank associate did a double-take. Alexander heard fragments of Melissa's words as he approached. Clearly not the type of client this institution caters to. Suggest you take your supposedly charitable donations elsewhere. Rachel caught sight of Alexander, relief washing over her features. Melissa, too engrossed in her power play, remained oblivious to his approach. Is there a problem here? Alexander asked, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. Melissa turned, irritation flickering across her face at the interruption, an expression that froze mid-formation as she registered the impeccably tailored charcoal suit, the subtle diamond cufflinks, and the air of absolute confidence that no amount of money could purchase. Melissa began, her customer service smile snapping back into place. Sir, I'm handling a situation with this person. Perhaps one of our other associates can assist you. Alexander's expression remained neutral as he stepped beside Rachel, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. I believe you're handling a situation with my wife. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap before silence. Melissa's face underwent a remarkable transformation, confusion followed by dawning recognition, culminating in an expression of pure horror as the implications cascaded through her mind. Your wife, she repeated, her voice suddenly an octave higher. Yes, Alexander confirmed. Rachel Torres, founder of the Torres Education Initiative. He gestured to the check on the desk. I see she's making the deposit for our new digital literacy program. The color drained from Melissa's face as her gaze darted between Rachel's casual clothes and Alexander's expensive suit, her world realigning with sickening speed. The young bank associate who had been watching took a small step backward, distancing himself from what was clearly becoming a catastrophic situation. Mr. Torres, Melissa stammered, recognition finally dawning completely. Alexander Torres of Torres Innovations. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? Alexander asked, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent that made several onlookers wince. From where I was standing, it appeared my wife was being publicly humiliated for not meeting your personal dress code standards. Sir, I was simply following protocol for large deposits. By suggesting she might be committing fraud? Alexander interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying through the now silent bank lobby. By threatening to call security? That's standard protocol at Meridian Global. The commotion had drawn attention throughout the bank. From his office overlooking the main floor, Charles Blackwell, the bank's regional director, noticed the growing crowd. His eyes narrowed as he recognized Alexander Torres, not just a client, but one whose personal and business accounts could represent hundreds of millions in deposits and investments. "Mr. Torres, please," Melissa pleaded, her professional demeanor crumbling. "If I had known who Mrs. Torres was." "And that's precisely the problem," Rachel spoke up, her quiet dignity returning. "The issue isn't how you treated me specifically. It's that you believe people deserve different levels of respect based on their perceived wealth or status." Alexander nodded, the irony being that my wife could have walked in wearing designer clothes and flashing status symbols. She chooses not to because she believes character matters more than appearances. A murmur rippled through the gathered spectators. Several nodded in silent agreement. "What's happening here?" An authoritative voice cut through the tension as Charles Blackwell approached, his expression shifting from professional concern to recognition. "Mr. Torres, this is an unexpected pleasure." "Charles," Alexander acknowledged with a slight nod. "I wish I could say the same. Unfortunately, my wife has just been subjected to treatment that I find difficult to reconcile with our 10-year banking relationship." Blackwell's gaze darted between Rachel, Alexander, and Melissa, whose complexion had taken on an ashen quality. His expression made it clear that the consequences of this encounter would extend far beyond this moment, transforming not just one career but potentially the culture of an entire institution. The glass walls of Charles Blackwell's office did nothing to contain the intensity unfolding within. Melissa Evans stood with her shoulders drawn back in a posture of defensive dignity that belied the trembling of her clasped hands. Blackwell's usually measured gestures had given way to emphatic movements that punctuated his words with unmistakable gravity. Throughout the bank, conversations hushed as covert glances tracked the unfolding drama. Meanwhile, Jason, the young associate whose silent discomfort had been evident during Rachel's humiliation, stepped forward with quiet purpose. "Mrs. Torres, if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to complete your foundation's account setup," he offered, his voice carrying a gentle respect that stood in stark contrast to Melissa's earlier dismissiveness. As Jason processed the paperwork with meticulous care, he hesitated before adding, "Your coding program helped my cousin's school last year. They had no computer lab until your foundation stepped in." Rachel's expression softened with genuine interest. "Which school?" "Madison Heights Elementary," he replied, a hint of pride warming his voice. "The principal sent me pictures of the lab opening. The kids couldn't believe they finally had new computers." Before Rachel could respond, Blackwell's office door swung open. Melissa emerged first, her composure clearly fragile beneath a veneer of professional restraint. The redness around her eyes betrayed emotions that her rigid posture attempted to conceal. Blackwell followed, his face etched with the gravity of a man confronting an institutional failure rather than a mere employee misstep. "Mr. and Mrs. Torres, I would value a moment of your time," he said, gesturing toward a private conference room adorned with tasteful artwork depicting New York's historic financial district. "Jason, please ensure the foundation's paperwork receives priority processing." Once the heavy mahogany door closed behind them, Blackwell took a deliberate breath before speaking. "First, please accept my profound personal apology for what transpired today. This represents more than an individual failing. It reveals a cultural blind spot within our institution that I find deeply troubling." Alexander's expression remained measured, the controlled calm of a man who had navigated countless high-stakes negotiations. "Charles, our relationship spans 10 years. During that time, Torres Innovations has directed over 20 high-value clients to Meridian Global, representing nearly $2 billion in assets." "I'm acutely aware," Blackwell acknowledged, the weight of those figures evident in his carefully modulated tone. "Then you understand this extends far beyond today's incident," Alexander continued. "Rachel wasn't mistreated because she's my wife. She was mistreated because she didn't fit someone's narrow vision of what belongs in these marble halls. How many others have faced similar judgment without having the means to demand accountability?" Rachel leaned forward, her quiet voice carrying a clarity that commanded attention. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm less concerned with apologies than with meaningful change. What happens tomorrow when another person dressed in simple clothes comes in carrying their life savings or a community organization's hopes? Blackwell studied her with newfound respect, noting the intelligence and purpose that Melissa had so blindly overlooked. "What would you suggest?" he asked Rachel directly, a subtle acknowledgement that had not gone unnoticed by Alexander, whose expression softened marginally. "Institute comprehensive bias training for every staff member," Rachel replied without hesitation. "Create clear policies establishing respect as non-negotiable regardless of appearance or account size. And establish a partnership with our foundation to create pathways for students from underserved communities into financial services." Blackwell's expression reflected genuine consideration rather than mere placation. "And Ms. Evans?" Alexander asked, his tone making it clear this was not a peripheral concern. "She has been removed from client-facing roles, effective immediately," Blackwell responded. "Her future with Meridian Global will depend on whether she demonstrates authentic understanding of why her actions were fundamentally unacceptable." A knock interrupted them. Jason entered with the completed paperwork, his posture reflecting both professionalism and purpose. "Everything has been processed according to the foundation specifications," he reported. Then, with a moment's hesitation, "Mr. Blackwell, I believe you should know that Mrs. Torres's foundation provides the technology program that transformed my cousin's school. Without their intervention, those students would have continued to fall behind in the digital age. Another statistic, another school forgotten by the system." As Jason departed, Blackwell's expression shifted as abstract concepts of community service crystallized into the concrete reality of a changed life. A transformation from numbers on a donation check to students with reclaimed futures. "I believe we have an opportunity here," Blackwell said thoughtfully, "not merely to address a wrong but to create something meaningful from this moment." Alexander's guarded expression invited elaboration without commitment. "In addition to implementing Mrs. Torres's suggestions, I propose establishing a dedicated community banking initiative, specifically designed to serve non-profit organizations and educational projects," Blackwell continued, "with particular attention to removing barriers that might discourage or exclude worthy causes seeking financial partnerships." Rachel studied him with a careful discernment that had guided her foundation's growth. "This isn't about charitable gestures or public relations, Mr. Blackwell." "I understand that now," he replied, unexpected humility tempering his executive confidence. "It's about recognizing inherent dignity and dismantling barriers that have no place in banking or society." In the lobby, a scene of quiet reckoning unfolded. Melissa Evans gathered her personal items, her movements mechanical as she processed the consequences cascading from what she had dismissed as routine judgment. As she prepared to leave, she paused beside Jason's desk. "That school you mentioned," she said, her voice barely carrying above the ambient sounds of the bank. "Madison Heights. That's where my daughter will be starting kindergarten next year." Jason looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Yes, how did you know?" Melissa swallowed visibly. "I read about the Torres Foundation's work there. I was pleased to see the improvements." The admission seemed to cost her something, a crack in the facade of perfection she had cultivated so carefully. As the Torres couple emerged from the conference room, the atmosphere throughout the bank had transformed. The earlier spectacle of humiliation had given way to something more complex, a collective recognition that systems built on appearance-based judgments ultimately diminish everyone involved. Melissa stood uncertainly near the exit, trapped between the imperative to leave and the need for resolution. After a moment's consideration, Rachel approached her. "Mrs. Torres," Melissa began, her voice barely audible. "I can't undo what happened, but—" "No, you can't," Rachel agreed, her tone firm yet absent the vindictiveness Melissa clearly expected. "But I understand your daughter will be attending Madison Heights next year." Melissa's startled expression confirmed Jason had shared this detail. "The foundation is hosting a technology open house there next month," Rachel continued, retrieving a business card from her purse. "You should attend with your daughter." Melissa accepted the card with unsteady fingers, as Rachel added, "Sometimes we judge others harshly because we're fighting battles no one sees. Your daughter deserves every opportunity to thrive in this digital age, regardless of anything that happened today." As the Torres couple departed, whispers followed them, not of scandal or confrontation, but of something more profound. The realization that wealth manifests most powerfully not in possessions or appearances, but in how we treat those we believe can offer us nothing in return. Alexander squeezed Rachel's hand as they walked toward their car. "After how she treated you, you still offered her daughter help," he said quietly. "That's why I fell in love with you 10 years ago and why I fall in love all over again every day." Rachel smiled, the simple gesture illuminating her face with a radiance no designer outfit could ever bestow. "Everyone deserves the chance to become better than their worst moment," she replied. "Sometimes transformation begins precisely when our certainties have been most thoroughly shattered." As they drove away, Meridian Global Bank stood on the threshold of its own transformation, one that would ripple outward in ways no one could yet imagine, touching lives far beyond its imposing walls. 6 months later, Rachel stood before a diverse audience, her simple elegance unchanged despite the national recognition her foundation had recently received. "Real change," she addressed the gathering of educators, parents, and financial professionals, "happens when opportunity meets accountability." The Meridian Global Community Banking Initiative had launched 8 weeks earlier, with Jason Chen now appointed as Community Outreach Director guiding its development. The program had already established financial partnerships with 32 educational institutions previously overlooked by traditional banking structures. Charles Blackwell sat in the front row, his journey from regional director to advocate for institutional change evident in his attentive posture. Alexander sat beside him, pride illuminating his features as he watched Rachel articulate the vision they had built together. And 3 rows back, less conspicuous but equally engaged, sat Melissa Evans. The months since that fateful day at the bank had transformed her in visible ways. After attending the technology open house with her daughter, she had gradually become involved with the foundation, eventually emerging as an effective advocate for digital literacy programs in elementary schools. "The simple path," Rachel continued, "is to assess worth through appearances, through clothing, possessions, or account balances. The meaningful path requires recognizing the dignity inherent in every person, regardless of external markers." The presentation screens displayed images of school initiatives now flourishing with proper financial support. Computer labs, coding classes, robotics programs, and teacher training workshops, all benefiting from banking relationships that would have been impossible under previous paradigms. After the presentation, Melissa approached Rachel with a tablet in hand. "My daughter's first digital project," she explained, displaying a simple animation the kindergartner had created. "The programs your foundation implemented made this possible." She hesitated before adding, "I think about that day at the bank constantly, how quickly I judged you, how easily I dismissed you." "And now?" Rachel prompted gently. "Now I understand that I was the one who didn't belong in that bank. Not because of my appearance, but because of how I behaved." Melissa's smile carried both regret and hope. "I'm grateful my lowest moment became my turning point." Across the room, Blackwell engaged in earnest conversation with Alexander. "The initiative has exceeded every projection," Blackwell reported. "Not just in community goodwill, but in solid business growth. It turns out serving educational institutions creates sustainable value." Alexander nodded. "The most effective solutions often do, not because they're designed for profit, but because they address authentic needs that have gone unmet." As evening descended, Rachel and Alexander walked through the school garden that had been the foundation's newest project. Now flourishing with early spring vegetables, it stood as living testament that meaningful change begins with small, consistent efforts. "What strikes me most," Rachel reflected, her breath visible in the cool evening air, "is that Melissa has become one of our most effective advocates. Our harshest critics truly can become our strongest allies when given the opportunity to see differently." Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's because you didn't simply want justice that day. You wanted transformation." Rachel leaned into his embrace, watching as garden lights illuminated pathways between carefully tended plots. "The work continues," she said, "but every time I see a parent like Melissa advocating for their child, or a banker like Jason creating pathways where none existed before, I'm reminded that change is possible. One person at a time," Alexander affirmed. "One assumption challenged at a time," Rachel added with quiet conviction. Together they walked on, Two people whose power to influence systems came not primarily from their financial resources, but from their unwavering belief that every person deserves to be seen, valued, and respected, regardless of the clothes they wear or the assumptions others might make about their worth.